If you enjoy this video, please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you see on my channel and would like to support me on Patreon, click on the link below. With the cancellation of Star Trek in 1969, it was thought that Star Trek would just fade out into TV obscurity. Fortunately, thanks to syndication, Star Trek was breathed new life into, garnering a newfound popularity. And in 1972, Star Trek had its first convention. The stars who were guests at this occasion spoke to a crowd of 10,000 fans, which surprised the actors, who were treated like royalty. It was almost like Beatlemania. They didn't even realize how big their fan base was. Star Trek had become a pop culture phenomenon. Creator Gene Roddenberry was always planning to do a major motion picture version of Star Trek, and with the release of Star Wars in 1977, the time was right to bring out a film version, because films set in space were cool again. Roddenberry would bring the idea forth to Paramount to start a Star Trek film franchise. Originally, Roddenberry's idea was to make a prequel, set before the Enterprise crew's 5-year mission, showing how the crew of the Enterprise first met. Roddenberry planned to do this as far back as 1968. With the success of the series in syndication, Roddenberry would convince the studio to begin work on the film in 1975. Paramount put in $5 million to begin development on the film. A number of well-respected writers started work on a suitable script for the film. The first script would be titled The God Thing. The story would have grounded Admiral Kirk assembling the original crew of the refitted Enterprise to clash with a godlike entity. Elements of this concept would later be used in Star Trek V: The Final Frontier in 1989. The film would be postponed until spring of 1976, while Paramount was filtering new scripts for Star Trek II, which was the working title. A number of acclaimed writers like Ray Bradbury, Theodore Sturgeon, and Harlan Ellison were approached. Gene Roddenberry ended up hiring a young writer by the name of John Poville to write a new story which would have the Enterprise crew setting an alternate universe right by time travel. Poville had a list of big names in the film industry he approached to develop the script. Big names like Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, and Robert Bloch. Poville also had a list of possible directors, including Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, and Robert Wise, who would eventually be the director for Star Trek: The Motion Picture in 1979. Unfortunately, Paramount did not think the Star Trek script was epic enough for a feature film, and so the studio scrapped the project in 1977. Paramount decided instead to do a Star Trek TV series titled Star Trek Phase 2. All of the original cast members would return, all except Leonard Nimoy. To replace Spock, a new Vulcan character called Zon was created, but the character was too young to fill the role of First Officer. Roddenberry developed the character Commander William Decker and the female character Ilia. The pilot episode would be titled In Thy Image. That was based on a 2-page outline by Gene Roddenberry. Also, Alan Dean Foster wrote a treatment for the pilot, which was going to be turned into a teleplay. Unfortunately, Star Trek Phase 2 was shelved, and the original idea of doing a motion picture was reviewed again. After the huge success of Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977, the time seemed right for a Star Trek feature film. Science fiction was popular again, especially films set in space. Pre-production for a Star Trek feature film was in full effect. The budget was estimated to be at $15 million, and Robert Wise would direct, and the film would be titled Star Trek: The Motion Picture. The film would be adapted from the original pilot treatment titled In Thy Image, and the script was rewritten and redeveloped. Wise would go on to say, the script was sound, and the action and visuals would be more exciting. Legendary film director Robert Wise was no stranger to science fiction, having directed classic films like The Day the Earth Stood Still in 1952 and The Andromeda Strain in 1971, but unfortunately he knew nothing about Star Trek. This would add a few problems to the production of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. which was intended to start shooting in the spring of 1978. All of the original cast members were excited about returning, except Leonard Nimoy, who was apprehensive about returning to the role of Spock, and originally would turn down the offer, so the beloved character Spock was left out of the screenplay. Director Robert Wise, having been informed by his daughter and son-in-law that the film would not be Star Trek without Spock, sent studio representative Jeffrey Katzenberg to New York City to meet Nimoy. Nimoy agreed to return as Spock when Katzenberg renegotiated his contract and paid him for unpaid royalties, which Nimoy never saw after Star Trek's cancellation. But before returning to his iconic role, the script had to meet with his approval. Eventually, after constant rewrites, the majority of the cast, director and producer all agreed on a final script. However, actor DeForest Kelley, Nimoy and William Shatner still had reservations about the script, feeling that the characters and relationships from the series were not in place. Kelley lobbied for greater characterization, but their opinions were largely ignored. On March the 28th, 1978, a press conference was held with all the original cast, with Wise and Roddenberry included, to announce Star Trek the Motion Picture was being made. Other original actors to return to Star Trek was Grace Lee Whitney, who played Yeoman Rand in the original series. Majel Barrett would also return as Nurse Chapel. Actor Mark Lenard returned, but not as Sarek, but as Klingon commander in the film's opening sequence. This was the third alien species that Lenard played in Star Trek. The two other species were a Romulan commander in the original series episode Balance of Terror, and Spock's father, Ambassador Sarek, in the episode Journey to Babel. Actor Stephen Collins was originally cast as Commander Decker in the cancelled Star Trek Phase 2, but he would reprise his role of Decker for the motion picture. Robert Wise thought Collins was an excellent actor and played the difficult role of Decker perfectly. Model-turned-actress Persis Khambatta was cast in the film as the Delta Navigator of the Enterprise, Ilea, a character whom Khambatta was originally going to play in the cancelled Phase 2 series. For the film, actor James Doohan actually created the distinctive Klingon dialect. Doohan's two sons appeared as extras in the film. The film would be the first time we saw ridges on the Klingons' heads. This was originally what Roddenberry wanted in the series, but budget constraints prevented him to do so. New sets were needed, and the Enterprise designer Matt Jeffries had to design a more modern, sleeker Enterprise. The costumes had to be modernised, and Roddenberry firmly believed throwaway clothes were the future, and an all-new uniform was created. The blue, greens and gold-coloured uniforms from the original series had to be revised. The women's original miniskirt were gone because the outfit was now considered to be sexist. The all-new designs were dull and boring and looked more like pyjamas. Thank God they changed the uniforms in the following films. Filming began on August the 7th, 1978. By the third day, the production was already a full day over schedule. Despite the delays, Wise refused to shoot more than 12 hours a day. All the bridge sets were the first to be shot for the film. The director was patient on set, given that Wise didn't know anything about the source material. Wise relied on the original actors, especially Shatner, to make sure the dialogue and characterizations were consistent with the show. When actor Walter Koenig walked on set the first day, he stated, "This may be Star Trek, but it isn't the old Star Trek." Koenig was hopeful for the film, but admitted he was disappointed by his character's bit part.
You know, studios start out with saying, let's do a Star Trek movie. Actors or writers start out, or producers start out with saying, where's the script? Studios will hand you 150 blank pages and say, here, fill this. Well, if you can't fill it successfully, it's a nightmare. It's a horror. And it was. Making that first movie was very, very dispiriting, very depressing. We had a bad script that just never worked. It was always a struggle to try to figure out how to bring some life to this project. And we did our best, but I never, the pendulum swung completely when that first movie came along, from being an actor and character-oriented Star Trek to an effects-oriented Star Trek.
During the shoot, Nimoy and Shatner would ad-lib their own lines in response to constant corrections. As August ended, production continued to slip further behind schedule. The last week of filming was faced with many difficulties.
Right down to the last day of shooting. We tried desperately to inject, and occasionally they'd say, okay, we'll shoot a little there. I'd come up with an idea. They cut it out of the movie. The last day, we're on the bridge shooting the final scene of the movie. We're all saying goodbye to each other. We've all come back supposedly for this mission, and now we're going back to our homes and so forth. And Kirk goes around to the various characters and says, okay, Dr. McCoy, we're going to take you back. He was come out of retirement or something, and came to me and said, Spock, we'll have it back on Vulcan in a day or two. And I was supposed to say, fine, Captain, I think I'll stay as well or something. And I thought, let's go for some fun here. We've been so somber this entire movie. There's been no humor, no charm, which Star Trek was full of. Charm and humor, full of it. So in the final rehearsal, when he came to me and McCoy had just said he was going to stay on the ship, I said, Captain, if Dr. McCoy is to stay here, my presence here will be essential. Got a big laugh out of the crew, big laugh. And then I saw a huddle with the bosses off camera. And Bob Wise, bless him, who was directing the movie, and really himself had said many times he didn't have a grasp of Star Trek. To me, and he said, well, the feeling is that it's not the right tone to end the movie. We should be a little bit more serious. And, okay. That was my gift to you. You don't want it? Fine, I'll take it back. They wouldn't let me do it. And that's an example of the kind of frustration that we had on the movie.
On January the 26th, 1979, the film finally wrapped, after shooting for 125 days. The three leads, Shatner, Kelly and Nimoy, delivered their final lines at 4:50 p.m. The post-production team had a huge task ahead of them, completing the film in time for a Christmas release. During editing, it was thought to have the Vulcans speak their own language during the scene on Vulcan in the movie. The language needed to be in sync with the actors, who during the shooting of the scenes were speaking English. Almost all the dialogue in the bridge scenes had to be overdubbed by the actors in post-production. The resulting rough cuts were used for a template to add sound effects, music and optical effects. Producers understood the film needed high-quality effects. Special effects master Douglas Trumbull, known for doing the groundbreaking effects for Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey in 1968, was hired to head effects on the film. Originally, when asked, Trumbull turned down the job because he was busy working on the Spielberg film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Trumbull was also tired of working on other people's productions, churning out effect after effect. Trumbull had planned to work on his own feature using a new film process. Robert Abel and associates were hired to work on the effects. They were originally hired to work on the effects on Star Trek Phase 2. The workload grew as they worked on the motion picture. Abel and Associates had to increase their budget to $750,000, and Gene Roddenberry suggested the cost of the effects be re-examined. Creative differences grew between Abel and Associates, and the Paramount production team parted ways. Douglas Trumbull's film project plans were rejected by Paramount. The producers of the motion picture told Trumbull he could have full creative control over the effects of the film, which were only partly finished. He accepted and was given the task to finish the effects by December of 1979, in time for Christmas release. The motion picture score was composed and conducted by legendary composer Jerry Goldsmith, who creates one of the most majestic scores ever created. The score for the motion picture creates so much emotion and grandeur. I mean, who could forget the Enterprise scene with that fantastic music? Goldsmith plays such a big part in the Star Trek universe, and Goldsmith produced scores for not only the motion picture, but 4 other Star Trek films, including Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, Star Trek First Contact, Star Trek Insurrection, and Star Trek Nemesis. He also did the main TV themes for Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Star Trek Voyager. In fact, Roddenberry had originally wanted Goldsmith to compose the music for Star Trek's original pilot episode, The Cage. Director Wise considered his work with Goldsmith one of his best working relationships with the composer. Part of Goldsmith's inspiration for the romantic, sweeping music style in the motion picture came from John Williams' score for Star Wars. Goldsmith once remarked, "If you stop and think about it, space is a very romantic thought. It is to me like the Old West. We're up in the universe. It's about discovery. It's really the basic premise of Star Trek." Finally, after the film was finalized, director Wise brought the film print to the Star Trek The Motion Picture premiere, held in Washington, D.C. Roddenberry, Wise and the main cast members attended the function. The rain reduced the turnout to just 300 people. Not unlike the merchandise for Star Wars, the franchise went all out as far as toys and other various merchandise.
It's uniquely Star Trek. It'll have more special effects than anything that's been shown yet. It's going to be in the forefront of everything, and hopefully it'll be wonderful.
Reviews were mixed. One critic said the film consisted of spaceships, which take an unconscionable amount of time to get anywhere, and nothing of dramatic or human interest happens along the way. Other critics disagreed. One said it's a search and destroy thriller that includes all the ingredients the show fans thrive on. The film was an enormous success, and it made $17 million in the first week. It made well over $139 million worldwide, and it was the 5th highest grossing film of 1979. Paramount were unfortunately disappointed as far as expectation went. The budget of $46 million was a massive cost. Added to the cost by the studio was the amount it cost to make the scrapped Phase 2 pilot. Roddenberry was blamed by the studio for many rewrites, and the direction he took with the film as far as the slow pace of the film, but regardless, the studio backed a sequel. Roddenberry, however, would lose his creative control on the next film, which was probably a smart move.
When the movie was released for video, later, they put back some of the things that we had suggested had been cut out for the theatrical release. And lo and behold, there was a positive response. We were getting fan mail and what have you from people saying, "Oh, now the movie makes sense because it had a little of this and had a touch of that, and it was more fun, it was more interesting."
Gene Roddenberry always saw Star Trek as a very serious and intelligent kind of franchise, where Star Wars was more of a fun adventure film aimed mainly at kids. Though the success of Star Wars certainly helped science fiction films become more relevant again, especially space films. William Shatner thought the overall film was very sluggish, and thought the Star Trek franchise died then and there with the motion picture, remarking, "We gave it our best shot, and it will never happen again." Nimoy said, "I think Gene Roddenberry and Robert Wise were looking for a 2001 A Space Odyssey kind of thing. A cold, cool, we're out here in space, and it's kind of quiet, and things move very slowly. There was a lot of that. And a lot of cerebral stuff. There wasn't a lot of drama. It just wasn't Star Trek. We had the Star Trek people, but we didn't use the characters very well." For the director's cut, Robert Wise improved the film. This cut was only ever available on DVD. Star Trek The Motion Picture was an impressive looking film. It certainly made the Enterprise look fantastic on the big screen. However, there are very slow scenes, and the acting was very cardboard. Special effects were certainly the major star of the film, rather than the characters. Although it was great to see the original actors back again, especially on the big screen, unfortunately, they aren't given much to do, just stare in awe at what's happening on the view screen and look robotic in their reactions. There are moments in the film where you get a small glimpse of the original characters coming through. Bones is of course his old cantankerous self, and Spock is of course that logical person we remember. But sadly, there's no humour or fun to the film. Robert Wise, knowing nothing about Star Trek, didn't help things, and Roddenberry's constant interference didn't help things either. Regardless of this, I have a genuine love and admiration for the film. Visually, it's a cut above the rest. Douglas Trumbull added something extraordinary to the film. The effects are among the best I've seen, and I enjoyed the story, which was both intelligent and thought-provoking. It's just the pacing and cardboard-style acting that makes the film suffer. The film had its various taglines given, like Star Trek The Motion Sickness and Star Trek The Motionless Picture. Regardless of the film's slow pacing, it is great to see the Enterprise for the first time with the incredible Goldsmith music in the background. The Enterprise certainly looks grand and majestic. My name's Jonathan. Thanks for watching.